had heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king, so he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them.
This is Paula, Joshua 10, verse 2. He and his people were very much alarmed at this because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters.
Joshua 10:3. This is
Verse
10. Is it verse 3
Yes.
or 4? 4.
3.
3. Okay. This is New American Standard, and I'm Sharon Kay. And I'm easily suggestible, so if you, you tell me 4, then 4. Therefore, Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, and to Piram, king of Jarmuth, and to Zaphiah, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying,
You got all the hard ones.
That is good, yeah. Joshua 10, verse 5. Do we want to arm wrestle? Okay, 4. Come up to me and help me, that we may attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel.
Phoebe, verse 5. Therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered together and went up, they and their armies, and camped before Gibeon and made war against it.
Okay, so I'm going to go over this information first, and then we'll talk about what's on the board. in verse 1, Adonai-Zedek, which means Lord of righteousness. And his city is the first mention of the city Jerusalem in the Old Testament. It's believed to mean an inheritance of peace or city of peace. In Abraham's time, there was no city. There was only Mount Moriah. And today, you know, that's where the Dome of the Rock is, and the Israelites and the Muslims are always fighting over that. Okay, so it was Mount Moriah where Abraham offered Isaac. Abraham named the area Jehovah Jireh, God will provide. Another name for well, it has another name, it's Jehusa, but Jebus was the one you find most often written. The Jebusites dwelt there in the time of the judges, and they kept it until the time of David. It was David who conquered it and changed it to Jerusalem. The Gibeonites lived among the other inhabitants, and though they obtained their treaty with Israel by trickery, it appears that the Gibeonites ever afterwards remained loyal to Israel and the true God. That's saying a lot. That's saying more for them than it does say for the Israelites.
Put your mic on your shirt.
Like here? I don't know how this thing, why it works that way. Upside down. Okay, how's that? Is that better? Okay, get up louder. Verse 2, and Adonai-Zedek was greatly afraid, for the Gibeonite city was much larger and more powerful than the city of Jebus. And now Israel was in control of it without firing a shot. And then look what happened to Jericho, and look what happened to Ai. And so they're looking out there among the land which Joshua has already conquered. And Joshua is right here in this area, and there is Jericho right there. And Jerusalem is down south here, across from the Dead Sea. So, and that's where Adonai-Zedek, the capital city, is. All right, and so in the King James Version tells us that the city of Gibeon was as one of the royal cities, but it had it had no king. It was governed by elders. Gibeon afterwards became the city of Saul, Israel's first king. In verse 3, Hebron is mentioned first, and it is one of the oldest inhabited communities of Palestine. It's situated about 19 miles southwest of Jerusalem. Here is Hebron, right here where that pink marker is. All right, so that's Hebron. And let's see what I leave off. Many patriarchal events are associated with Hebron. One, Abraham dwelt there on the plains of Mamre. And here it was that Sarah died, and Abraham bought the cave at Machpelah. Then Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Rebekah and Leah are all buried there. At Hebron, the 12 spies first found the giant Anakims. And so this place held many sacred memories for the Israelites. Okay, so then we come to the 5 kings and the 5 cities. So I put this on the board for you to see them, so you can kind of pull them together as they are. And then each one of them is associated with a town on this side. So Adonai-Zedek, this is of Jebus, later was Jerusalem. His kingdom is right somewhere. Oh, right here. Here's where he lives, right there. And then Piram is Jarmuth, that's 15 miles west. Don't see it. Japhia is the city of Lachish, which is right here. It has to be right in here somewhere. So you're going from here, Hebron, here is Lachish right here. And Debir is right here, so we're down in this area. And its capital is, King Debir, his capital is Eglon. So it is right here. And it's 15 miles northeast of Gaza. Here's Gaza right here. We hear a lot about Gaza in the news today. Yeah. And Debir is right here. And Hoham is the king, and Hebron is where, so we're looking, it's where Abraham lived. This area right here so far. But we also have all of these through here that was eventually conquered by them. All right, so that gives you an idea where we are in the geographical sense of things. Okay, so in verse 4, we have King Adonai-Zedek. He puts out a call to these other 4 kings, and he tells them, come up and help me. And it's interesting that the term come up is actually geographically correct, because Jerusalem is on a higher altitude than these other cities. They dwelt in the lowlands. So you notice they planned to strike Gibeon. They're not going to strike Joshua and his armies directly. We do not hear of one direct attack on Israel. All their battles were on the offensive. In the spiritual battles, as well as military battles, the best form of defense is often offense against the enemy. In verse 5, the 5 kings are referred to as Amorites, meaning they are, which is the same thing as saying Canaanites. And it is probably because the Amorites were the most powerful of the people in the countryside. Okay, so that gives us kind of perspective geographically where these places are located and who the kings were, and that they formed an alliance with Adonai-Zedek, making up the 5 kings that we'll read as we go into the story. Okay, so now we're going to start with verse 6, and we're going to go through verse 11.
Okay, Judy, verse 6. The men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, saying, do not forsake your servants. Come up to us quickly, save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us.
March, verse 7. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, and he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor.
Verse 7. Verse 8. The Lord spoke to Joshua, don't be afraid of these kings, because I have given them into your hand. They will not be able to stand against you.
Krista, verse 9, New King James. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal.
Joyce, King James, verse 10. And the Lord discomfited them before Israel, and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them along the way that goeth up to Bethorn, and smote them to Azekah and unto Makkedah.
And it came to pass as they fled from before Israel and were in the going down to Bethlehem, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them until, and they died. And they were more which died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel with the sword.
Okay, interesting. All right, so let's go and see what happens, bring this more alive for us. The Gibeonites turned to Joshua. First thing they did, of course, they have a treaty with Joshua. They were powerless before these 5 kings and their armies, and they hoped that despite their fraud and deceit, that Joshua would come to their aid. This situation represents how we may call on God when hard pressed by spiritual enemies. We may feel unworthy of divine aid because of our sins, but we may know for certain that no sincere prayer for help will go unanswered. Amen. It's encouraging, yeah. Verse 7, and Joshua and the armies of Israel set out on a 24-mile march uphill from Gilgal. So where their camp is at Gilgal, right across from right here, and they're going to Gibeon, which is right here. So it's 24 miles from Gilgal to Gibeon right here. Okay. All right, so it tells us that Gibeon, and they arrived at Gibeon early in the morning. Now that's interesting. They marched all night, and then the next morning they arrived ready for war, for battle. That's amazing. They must have eaten some good food. Joshua's soldiers were hand-picked men experienced in warfare. He just didn't take anybody. Verse 8, a better translation for this would be, for the Lord hath said, indicating that Joshua had counseled with God before running off to battle on his own. This shows us that he has learned his lesson. Yes. Verse 9 uses the word suddenly. The task at hand required immediate action. Many a cause is defeated by lack of action, or action that comes too late. That's just so typical of America. We wait till everything falls apart, and then we say, how can we fix these problems and not have them again? Instead of meeting them at the pass and cutting them off at the pass. No. Oh, I just had to throw that in. Thank you. I noticed I didn't hear any discontent out there. Thank you. All right, the army of Israel marched all night, and they were ready for battle the next morning, catching these 5 kings by surprise. They had no idea they were coming. Verse 10, God sent fear into the hearts of the enemy kings, causing them to turn and run. This is an example of how the Lord would have worked for the entire conquest of Canaan if the Israelites had always been willing to work according to his plan. And this was such a simple takeover of 5 major kings. So now this is interesting about Beth Horon. Beth Horon was made up of 2 cities. There was an upper Beth Horon and a lower Beth Horon. And it says they controlled the mountain pass that Joshua and his men had pursued these characters through. They are called also the Twin Cities. The path descending from Beth Horon upper to Beth Horon lower was very rocky and rugged. It was so steep that steps had been cut into the rocks to facilitate getting down from one part of the city to the second part of the city. Here the Lord sent hailstones upon them. From this point, the enemy turned and in a southerly direction to Jarmuth and to Lachish, the homes of the 2 of the 5 kings. So they were, Beth Horon is right here, and here is those other cities. Lachish is here, right along. So turning and coming southward, getting out of the way. Israel is coming. All right, verse 11, God intervenes using these hailstones. Now, there are records from places like China that have recorded hailstones weighing as much as 1/2 pound to 3/4 pound. These, God used hail in Egypt, and in the book of Job, God tells us that he has treasures of hail in store for future battles. And in Revelation 16, it talks about the great hailstones, a talent, which is 75 pounds. So can you imagine a hailstone weighing 75 pounds coming out of heaven? That's in Revelation chapter 16, I believe. 17 to 21 talks about God will use hailstones in the final battle of earth. That's why everything gets beat down. Nothing could survive that. Nothing. All right, so that kind of gives us an idea of what's going on here now. Verses, oops, where am I? 12? Oh, I've got the wrong page. 12 through 14. 12 through 14.
This is Trish, 12, New King James. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon.
Sandy from the Clear Word, verse 13. The Lord heard Joshua's prayer. He made the sun and the moon stand still until Israel had totally defeated all 5 armies. This is recorded in the Bible, where it says, the sun stops in the middle of the sky, giving Joshua an extra long day.
Joyce, verse 14. And there has been no day like that, before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel.
All right, now let's look at this. This is a very, very interesting and fascinating thing. It's in verses 12 to 14. It is not the sun that moves, but the earth in its rotation around the sun. And it appears that God stopped the rotation of the earth for a day. Wow. However it happened, it shows that Israel, God was all-powerful. The sun and the moon were gods to these people. They worshiped the sun. They worshiped the moon. The Canaanites did. And it shows that their gods were totally powerless. Somewhere years ago I read, whether it's true or not, I don't know, science and astronomers and stuff studying the universe and studying all the things. They found that there was missing a 24-hour period in the time, because you can calculate time because it's so precise, it never changes. Time past, time present, time future. And they were looking back and somehow or another discovered that there was missing a 24-hour day. And they couldn't figure out why. Oh, maybe they should read their Bibles. Because that tells us right there where it is. So I don't know how true that is or how true it's not. I had put down something from Ellen G. White's book on Patriarchs and Prophets, page 509. Let me see if it was significantly important. It's 509. Oh, here it is, yeah. Let me see. It's on page 509, kind of in the middle of the page. You probably don't have your book with you. It's okay. You can just jot it down. It says, this mighty miracle testifies that creation is under the control of the Creator. The creation is under control of the Creator, okay? Satan seeks to conceal from men the divine agency in the physical world, to keep out of sight the unwearied working of the first great cause. In this miracle, all who exalt nature above the God of nature stand rebuked, aka climate change advocates. At his own will, God summons the forces of nature to overthrow the might of his enemies. And then it talks about the hail and the fire and snow, and the Amorites had set themselves to resist his purpose. God interposed, casting down these great stones from heaven upon the enemies of Israel. We are told of a greater battle to take place in the closing scenes of earth's history, when Jehovah will open his armory and hath brought forth the weapons of his indignation. Jeremiah 50:25. Hast thou, he inquires, God inquires, entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of hail, which I have reserved until the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? That's Job 38:22 and 23. John the Revelator describes the destruction that is to take place when the great voice out of the temple of heaven announces, "It is done." And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, or 75 pounds. That's where that comes from. That's very sobering. If they worry about climate change now, they're going to really be worried. Okay, let's look at verse 15 through 21.
This is Nora reading from NIV, verse 15. Then Joshua returned with all of Israel to the camp of Gilgal.
But these 5 kings had fled and hidden themselves in a cave at Makkedah. And it was told Joshua, saying, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave in Makkedah.
Verse 18, he said, roll large rocks up to the mouth of the cave and post some men there to guard it.
Verse 19, but don't stop. Pursue your enemies, attack them from the rear, and don't let them reach their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand.
Verse 20, and it came to pass, when Joshua and the children of Israel had made an end of slaying them with a very great slaughter, till they were consumed, that the rest which remained of them entered into fenced cities.
Sharon, King James Version, verse 21, and all the people returned to the camp to Joshua at Makkedah in peace.
Okay, verses 16 through 21 here. Let's have some, or 15. These 5 kings now had escaped. Interesting, they're all together. And they went and hid in a cave. So Joshua did not spend time trying to remove them from the cave, but he sealed the cave and he set guards. Joshua was focused on the larger work at hand, and he would deal with these kings later. Nothing must delay the battle with the Canaanite forces. And so now he goes and tells us what he's going to do with these kings. So verses 22 to 27.
Wanda, King James Version, verse 22. Then said Joshua, open the mouth of the cave and bring out those 5 kings unto me out of the cave.
Terry, New King James, verse 24, or 23. And they did so, and brought out those 5 kings to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon.
New American Standard, verse 25, 24, 24. Sorry, a short-term memory, sorry. When they brought these kings out to Joshua, Joshua called for all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with them, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. So they came near, and they put their feet on the necks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Verse 25, New King James. Then Joshua said to them, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed. Be strong and of good courage, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight.
Surely, NIV, verse 26. Then Joshua put the kings to death and exposed their bodies on 5 poles, and they were left hanging on the poles until evening.
No, I'm going to tell you in just a minute. I'm going to finish 27. All right, 27.
Jackie, verse 27. And it came to pass at the end of the going down of the sun that Joshua commanded. They took them down off the trees and cast them into the cave wherein they had been hid. Laid great stones in the cave's mouth, which remain until this very day.
Okay, in verses 24 and 25, Joshua displays his leadership skills with his soldiers by taking them into his confidence. A true leader shares both the joys and the sorrows of service with his fellow laborers. And nowhere else is it as clear as it is in the military. If you really love your leader, they'll do most anything for them, your captain or your general or whoever may be leading. If they've won the confidence of the soldiers, they'll do anything for the man. So Joshua had confidence that his army, and that they had confidence in him, which was a winning combination. Okay, now putting their feet on the necks of the defeated foes was a custom of that time, and can be seen in these monuments, carved monuments in Assyria and Egypt. They'll draw pictures of themselves with their feet on the enemy's neck. It was a token of complete victory. To Israel, it represented complete subjection of their enemies by God. In verse 26 and 27, the Hebrews did not hang men alive before the Roman times. The victim was killed first, and then he was hung up, and then was removed before night. And in verse 27, this refers to the long day in which Joshua and the armies of Israel defeated the 5 kings. So that pretty much makes that clear about why they did what they did. Okay, this is submission to show everybody around. It walks by. Those kings are dead. You belong to us now. All right, so continuing on, we've got verse 20. This is a longer one, I believe. Let me see, maybe this is not this is the one I wanted to kind of just summarize some of this, because it's just a repeat of all these names, and Joshua, conquered this one, and he conquered that one, and so on and so on. Okay, verse 28. On the day that Joshua took Makkedah and struck it with his king on the edge of the sword, he utterly destroyed them, and all the people who were in it remained. And so he did that to the king, and then it goes on to the king of Libnah, and the king of Lachish, and the king of Hebron, and the king of did so and so on. Same thing he says over and over and over again. And then it goes to verse 40. So Joshua conquered all the land, the mountain country and the south and the lowland and the wilderness, with none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. In verse 41, Joshua conquered them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. All the kings in their land Joshua took one at a time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. And then Joshua returned, and all Israel returned with him to the camp at Gilgal. So they've conquered 90% of the territory, it seems like. Let's see, there's a couple of points here. Let's see, let's see, what do I want to share here? I think that covers it pretty well, because simply just a repetition of him conquering each one of those 5 kings and their territories, plus the other territories that he conquered. So this whole area now, because here is Kadesh down here, and here's Gaza up here, and he is camped here at Gilgal. So this whole region now is under the control of Israel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So God had established all this territory as being for the descendants of Abraham, and he had particularly designated very specific territories for them, and for each tribe. Now, when they did this is south of those territories, isn't it?
Well, first of all, the land has not been divided yet. It's not been parceled out to the tribes. They're just in the process of conquering it. So they haven't divided the tribes.
Was this part of the area that Abraham...
When we get the other map, you will see, I have on that another map that shows the division of the tribes, and we'll talk about who gets what. But this has not happened yet.
Okay, I got ahead of us.
You are ahead, because it...
Yeah, I got ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No problem. Okay, we'll come into that at some point. Now, we're turning to the northern kings. Now, he's conquered the central and southern kingdom right here. Now we're coming up here into this area where he's going to be conquering parts of these territory. So we're starting with chapter 11, and we're going to go first to verse 1 through 5 in chapter 11.
Chapter 11. And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard these things, that he sent Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Ashaph.
Verse 2, and to the kings who were from the north in the mountains, in the plain south of Chinoa, in the lowland and in the heights of Dor on the west.
Verse 3. Jabin also sent messages to the Canaanite kings to the east and west of Jordan, to the Amorites, Hittites, and Perizzites, and Jebusites who lived in the mountains, and to the Hivites who lived at the foot of Mount Hermon in the land of Mizpah, to come and help him fight against Joshua.
Verse 4, and they came out with all their troops, a great host in number, like the sand that is upon the seashore, with very many horses and chariots.
And when all these kings had met together, they came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel.
Okay, so in verse 1 we meet the Jabin, who is possibly they think a title rather than a person's name. And he heads up a confederacy of the northern kingdom and tribes. Hazor was a strongly fortified city southwest of Lake Hula. Now here's where that is located. You know, there's the Sea of Galilee here. There's a little lake above it. That's the lake they're talking about right here. And this is where all these tribes are. This is Hazor right here. Meron, and the waters of Meron. It empties into the Sea of Galilee is what it does. And Mount Hermon, we've done that one before. Let's see, where's Mount Hermon is way up here. So now Joshua is moving this direction. You can see this is the top of where he's going to be able to conquer that territory. So let's see what it says. This was, the lake was about 4 miles of the, south of the outlet of, 4 miles south from the southern outlet of the lake. It lay in one of the most pleasant valleys in Palestine. The open water is about 2 miles broad at its widest point and 4 miles long. A great marsh of papyrus reeds stretches about 6 miles north of this clear surface of the lake, and is about 1 to 3 miles in width. I'm sure all that's gone today. I'm sure none of that's there. In verse 2 and 3, Jabin calls the kings of the northern mountains around and south of the Sea of Galilee and east. He calls all those guys together, and they form a coalition. And Josephus now, who wrote the history of Israel back in right after the short of the time of Christ, he says they numbered, now this is hard to believe it's this many, but they numbered 300,000 armed footmen, 10,000 horsemen, and 20,000 chariots. Well, we don't hardly have armies in the world that are that big, except maybe North Korea and China. The land of Canaan had no horses, so they may have come, the horses that they're using may have come from Armenia, which would be way up north and over by the Mediterranean somewhere. This is a formidable army, and yet God promised Joshua success. In verse 5, the kings chose a place where the chariots could maneuver, and the great army must have been filled with confidence, and they look out and see all those soldiers. Many numbers and equipment are of no avail against the forces that has the God of heaven on its side. Meanwhile, Joshua and the army of Israel was camped at Gilgal, so they're back home. It appears that the Canaanite army plan was to draw Israel out and to fight them on the plains near Lake Meron, where the horses and chariots would be usable. The distance from Gilgal to Meron is 70 miles. So here we go, right here. Here he is here. His camp, his soldiers are camped here. And here's the lake up here. So that's 70 miles distance from Gilgal to that lake. That's not really very far in our terms of thinking. Yes, D has a question. Hold just a minute. Let them get you a microphone so everybody will be able to hear what you say.
What lake is that up there?
Meron is what it's called, Meron. And then Sea of Galilee is down below it.
Thank you. With Israel occupying, or God sending them this land, bringing them to this land, and maybe you already established this question. Is it, we know and understand that God was going to give them the land to occupy.
It was a promise to Abraham.
But with getting rid of the people in those countries or those lands, is it too that they were heathen and idolaters? And that too is what God wanted to get rid of?
Yeah. Right. This was to be a shining city on the hill, sort of, that Israel would be, to go out as a missionaries around the world from the land of Canaan. But of course they didn't ever do that. But that's right.
Many people have said to me that they have a hard time finding God in the Old Testament.
We've discussed that some here in some of the classes, because it's difficult. But God's dealing with difficult situations. He's got
look at the love for his people.
Yeah, well, you got to not let that overshadow the love that God has, and for these people too. Remember Rahab? He was willing to. The Gibeonites, God accepted them in, even though there was a trickery, and He blessed them, and they worked in the sanctuary for the rest of their existence. So there's lots of wonderful, beautiful pictures of God's love in there if you can just get past the warfare. So thanks, Steve, for that. All right, a couple other points here. Now we've got all these men here. There's the kings chose this place for them to meet, where they got a little off. Joshua and the army were camped at Gilgal, and it appears that the Canaanite army's plan was to draw them out, and I said 70 miles. And Joshua, however, planned a surprise attack. The march from Gilgal to Meron took about 5 days, since an army and its supplies travel slowly. So let's find out what his surprise is going to be for these kings that have come out to meet him, the northern kings. All right, so verses 6 through 11.
Them for tomorrow about this time I will deliver all of them slain before Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire.
Verse 7.
I'll tell you in just a minute. Yeah, got it covered, don't worry.
Verse 7. So Joshua came, and all the people of war with him, against them by the waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them.
Verse 8, and the Lord delivered them unto the hand of Israel, who smote them and chased them into a great Zion, and until Moriah, and unto the valley of Mizpeh eastward, and they smote them until they left them none remaining.
Verse 9, so Joshua did to them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire.
Verse 10, then Joshua went back to attack the city of Hazor. He captured it and executed Jabin, the king who had started this confederacy against Israel, and who was one of the few who had made it back home after the battle.
Joyce, New King James, verse 11, and they struck all the people who were with it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There were none left breathing. Then he burnt Hazor with fire.
Okay, I'm going to cover this very quickly if I can. Verse 6, the encouragement comes from God to Joshua the day before the battle. God encourages Joshua to tell the army that they must put forth all their effort, even though God would give them the victory. The wonders that God did for Israel was not to lead them into inaction, but to motivate them, to encourage them, and to act vigorously for themselves. God would subdue the Canaanites by making Israel's efforts effective, and the victory would be God's work through Israel, as if God reigned, as when he rained the hailstones down on the enemy. And Bible commentary says on page 232, miracles have often occurred at the beginning of new ventures to provide a basis for faith and to give assurance of divine assistance. Later, they become less frequent as a sign that God has, it's not as a sign that God has forsaken his people, but as a token that he calls for greater faith to be exhibited by those through whom they have not seen, though they have not seen, may learn to believe. For example, the amazing miracles that happened at the beginning of the Christian era. But as historical evidence increases and the need for miracles decreases because of that, today, in full blaze of scriptural and historical evidence, there is sufficient evidence for faith apart from supernatural events. This does not mean the day of miracles is past. It is God who decides the need and the occasion for them. That's the thing, we have to be real careful about miracles and where they're coming from. Try the spirits, make sure it's not coming from the enemy.
Is there a reference for that?
Bible commentary, page 232. Verse 6 continues on. God orders Joshua to have the enemy's horses hamstrung, which means they cut the tendons in the legs above the hock of the horse's foot to make them useless. Why was this command given? Well, horses were used for military purposes only. And God did not want Israel to put their trust in horses or in chariots, but in him alone. The horses would have been a double burden. Since they were unsuited for agriculture, Israel was to be an agricultural society and not a commercial one. They were not to rely on human resources, and they were not to be a wandering military people with a large army. God proposed to remove such temptations from them, and for that reason ordered the captured horses to be hamstrung and the chariots to be burned. Does that make sense, everybody?
It leaves the horse alive?
Yes, the horse is still alive. I guess they just turned him out and let him go off on their own.
The horse is crippled or lame. Just crippled or lame.
Well,
kind of like when the people, fought the 1800 wars or something like that, or the Civil War. They'd shoot the horse, and the people would fall off, and horses are good military defense, but you'd shoot the horse so that it's no longer, but once you shoot a horse or lame a horse like that, he's pretty much suffering, and, you
it is, and that's another one of those hard things that we have to deal with.
Yeah, be merciful.
Let me finish this and then we'll be through. In verses 7 and 8, Joshua arrives at the waters of Meron, and he fell upon the enemy in surprise. The Canaanites fled in 3 directions. One group went northwest into Phoenicia, which was about 40 miles. Another went south, and a third went southwest. And so Joshua divided his army, and he sent them after the fleeing Canaanites. The valley of Mizpah was northeast from Mount Hermon, and not all the Canaanite army was destroyed. Some of them found refuge in the cities of Tyre and Sidon. However, all who fell into Israel's hand were put to the sword. King Jabin, the leader of the Confederacy, fled to Hazor up by Lake Meron, but Joshua's army captured the city, smote the king, and burned Hazor. So, Joshua is on a roll, or God is, I guess. All right, so we'll stop right there if you want to mark your spot. Lots of war, it really is. That's why I didn't really want to go into a lot of the other stories about war. All they're doing seems to be fighting. I want to make a switch. I thought what I would do is when we finish Joshua, we would do the book of Ruth. That would be a nice book. There's a lot of typology in the book of Ruth, and kinsman redeemer and all of these things in there. So it would be a nice change of pace. Yes,
it's hard to imagine that God would destroy all these people, but we need to remember they all came from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These people were sons of Noah, and they're all related, so they all knew who God was. They knew who the true God was, because there were miracles with these Israelites, and they had a choice to make. God doesn't take away your choice. So these people chose to worship idols. They chose to do these things. And he did not want the Israelites to be infected with this. Because they knew better. They all knew better. And if any of them wanted to be saved, like you said before, you know, Abraham came up of the Chaldees, you know, he came up out of Babylon. He chose not to worship idols, he chose. So any of these people could have chosen to follow the true God if they had wanted to.
That's exactly right. And you could have the Gibeonites as a good example. Even though they did it by trickery, they actually accepted Christ. All right, who else needs to?
It's really something, because I even see it with people I know, how mortified they are how Israel is killing people. And I don't find it unusual when I'm reading the Old Testament and seeing how the Israelites were told to kill these people. And I mean, you can at least say they're being told, leave. Civilians are being told, leave, we're going to be doing this. But I think people need to read the Old Testament to find out God wanted these people out of the way. And it's hard for us who are, quote, civilized. You know, it's okay that we murder and we mutilate and we rape and we destroy people, that we do this. And that's like kind of glossed over. But yet, here's a military invasion for right, and we can't handle the death and the killing.
Good point, Sharon. Thank you. Terry?
I keep going back to the map because I think about the same thing that Sharon talks about. It's like we're visiting the same battle. It's the same battle that Joshua had victory over all those years back. And the victory wasn't Joshua's, it was God's victory. This is the land God had established for the kingdom of Israel. And it wasn't just at that time, it was 400 plus years before that. God said, this is what I'm going to give you. And they were in that land for what, 300 years before they went to Israel? To Egypt?
Something like that.
Yeah, so they had already like established, plus the burial grounds and all of that clarifies that yes, this was their land. And the difference is nowadays, like something might be called the United States of America because there's been victory over all, through the battles that took this country, and England because of the battles that they won, and what is under the United Kingdom because of the battles that they won, and so forth. But none of them was in God's name. I know that Revelation talks about the land beast being here, but so I'm not sure about that whole, whether this was God ordained or not, but the fact that this is the land that God had established for his people, and it wasn't just because he liked them more. It was because he had a purpose for them. He had a job for them. And yeah, they didn't do it, but that is, when God says something, he doesn't change.
Right. Thank you, Terry.
My point's almost mute by now, but moot. But I just want to footstep what Pat was saying about the choice. And just like in the Bible days, the people had a choice. They knew God. They chose to step away. And many of us choose to step away, and we will choose to step away, especially in the last days, you know. And it's sad, but it's like I tell my children, I don't care what happens, stay on the boat.
Absolutely.
Stay on
Stay
the
with
boat.
That's right, don't get
So,
off.
Yeah,
Even though it looks like
because time is winding up.
That's right.
I just want to say amen to that, Wanda.
Mhm.
And step away. It doesn't start with when it's time for the 7 plagues. It starts this morning for me. If I step away, and I got to get this one thing thawing from the freezer. I've got to get this thing in the washer. I have stepped away from my morning appointment commitment, absolutely must have with my God, or the rest of the day I might as well just erase it and give up on it. I'm being impressed with that more and more in my life because I am such a busybody. Doing for, and the way I do it most of the time, I'm doing it for Satan. It really, when it boils right down to it, I'm not being where Jesus wants me to be first thing in the day. Thank you. Get off my soapbox.
Anyone else? All right, let's close this portion of our time together. Thank you, Lord, for the reminders that time with you and serving you is what it's all about. Be with us as we go about this day. Be with each one of our friends and our families. And be with us this week as we serve you.